In the quiet town of Mercer, the clock above the abandoned hardware store chimed twice, echoing through the desolate streets. It had been a year since the dead began to walk, and the once bustling town had succumbed to the relentless march of decay. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. In a dilapidated office building, the stench of rotting flesh was thick in the air. Two figures moved cautiously through the darkened hallways, their footsteps muffled by the dust that had settled over the years. Rick Grimes, a man with a weary gaze and a stubborn set to his jaw, glanced around the corner before signaling for Negan to follow. Negan, the charismatic leader with a penchant for cruelty, trailed behind with a smirk that never seemed to leave his face. The building they had taken refuge in was once a bastion of local commerce, now a tomb for the undead. They had stumbled upon it while searching for supplies, but the walls that had once contained life now held them hostage. Walkers, their eyes glazed and skin hanging off in strips, shuffled aimlessly outside, drawn to the sounds of the living within. As they descended into the basement, the air grew colder, the smell of mildew mixing with the odor of the dead. Negan's leather jacket creaked with every step, a stark contrast to the silent determination of the man he followed. Rick's mind was a tumult of rage and grief, his thoughts consumed by the brutal deaths of his friends at Negan's hand. Glenn and Abraham, both gone in a bloody display of power that had left a gaping wound in the heart of their group. The stairs groaned under their weight, and a sudden snap of wood sent a chill down Rick's spine. He paused, his hand tightening around his machete, eyes searching the gloom for movement. Negan chuckled, the sound bouncing off the concrete walls. "You're jumpy, Ricky boy. Can't say I blame you." His voice was like gravel in a blender, grating on every nerve. Rick didn't respond. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, finding a way out. The basement was cluttered with debris and forgotten inventory, offering plenty of cover. They had to be careful, though. The least sound could attract the horde outside. A beam of light pierced the darkness, and Rick squinted against the glare. It was a flashlight, its batteries flickering in the hand of a young girl. Her wide eyes met his, and for a moment, hope flared in his chest. But as quickly as it appeared, it was snuffed out. The girl was a walker, her cheek torn away, revealing the grisly reality beneath the skin. With a grim expression, Rick raised his weapon. But Negan was faster, slamming the butt of his bat into the creature's head with a sickening crunch. "You're welcome," he said, wiping a strand of her hair from the weapon with a casual flick. The silence that followed was unnerving. Rick stared at the crumpled body, his thoughts racing. He knew he couldn't trust Negan, not after what he'd done. But for now, survival was the only thing that mattered. He had to keep his cool, keep moving. They pushed deeper into the basement, the air growing denser with every step. The walls closed in around them, and the shuffling of the walkers grew louder. The sound of breaking glass from above sent a jolt of fear through Rick's body. The building was compromised, and their escape route was now blocked. Negan's smirk grew wider, the shadows playing across his face. "Looks like we're gonna have some company, Sherlock." Rick clenched his jaw, his grip on the machete tightening. "We'll find a way out," he murmured, more to himself than to Negan. "Oh, I'm sure we will," Negan agreed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But the question is, who's going to be doing the walking out of here?" The tension between them grew palpable, a third entity in their desperate dance through the darkness. Rick knew that once they were safe, he'd have to face Negan, to avenge his friends. But for now, he had to set aside his hatred and focus on survival. They stumbled upon a metal door, rusted and warped with time. It was their only hope. With a grunt, Rick threw his shoulder into it, the hinges screeching in protest. The door gave way, revealing a narrow corridor lined with pipes and electrical wiring. The smell of earth and dampness filled their nostrils as they stumbled through the tight space. Negan's bat, named Lucille, swung in wide arcs, knocking aside cobwebs and sending dust particles spiraling into the beam of the flashlight. "You know," he said, panting slightly, "this isn't what I had planned for today. But hey, a little adventure never hurt anybody." Rick ignored the banter, his eyes scanning the corridor for any sign of an exit. The light grew dimmer as they progressed, the batteries in the flashlight giving their last fight against the encroaching darkness. The walls pressed closer, and the air grew thick with the stench of decay. A low moan echoed through the corridor, and both men froze. The sound grew louder, closer. Walkers were shuffling towards them, drawn by the noise. Rick's heart raced, his knuckles white against the handle of his machete. Negan's eyes gleamed in the dim light, the excitement of the hunt apparent even in the face of danger. They backed up, their eyes never leaving the shadows ahead. The first walker stumbled into view, its clothes tattered, a gaping hole where its stomach used to be. Rick took a step forward, machete at the ready, but Negan put a hand on his chest. "Let me," he whispered, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "After all, I've got a bit more experience with these things." With surprising grace, Negan stepped around Rick and approached the creature. The walker lunged, but Negan was ready. He swung his bat in a swift arc, the metal connecting with the walker's skull with a sickening crunch. The creature dropped to the ground, lifeless once more. As they moved deeper into the bowels of the building, the moans grew more numerous. The walls began to shake, the floor trembling beneath their feet. It was clear the walkers had found their scent, and their numbers were growing. The stakes had never been higher, and the only thing keeping them alive was the tenuous bond that had formed between them. The corridor opened up into a room with a single boarded-up window. The boards looked weak, a potential escape route. But as they approached, a snarling, gnashing horde of walkers appeared from the other side, drawn by the light and the scent of the living. Rick and Negan exchanged a look, each knowing what the other was thinking. This was their chance. With a roar, they charged forward, the sound of splintering wood and the snarls of the undead filling the air. The window shattered, and the cool evening breeze hit their faces as they tumbled into the night, the dead close on their heels. The race was on. Rick and Negan sprinted through the overgrown alley, the undead hot on their heels. The moon cast eerie shadows across the cracked asphalt, and the sound of the walkers' pursuit grew louder. Negan's eyes searched for a clear path, while Rick's hand tightly gripped the flashlight, illuminating the way ahead. The cold steel of the machete was a comforting weight at his side, but it was no match for the sheer volume of the horde. They rounded a corner, and the alley opened up to a chain-link fence. Negan leapt, planting a foot on a rusted dumpster, and swung his bat at the fence. The metal links gave way with a metallic screech, and the two men tumbled through the gap. The walkers, unable to follow their nimble movements, stumbled into the fence, their moans growing frustrated. They didn't stop running until the alley spit them out into a small, abandoned parking lot. Negan bent over, gasping for breath, his bat resting on his shoulder like a weary sentinel. "Looks like we've got some breathing room," he said, panting. Rick didn't miss a beat. He turned on Negan, the rage from earlier now a living, pulsing entity. "We're not done," he spat, machete pointing at the man who had taken so much from him. Negan's smirk never wavered. "I know you want to, Rick, but we're still in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. Maybe save your rage for the actual monsters." Rick's hand trembled with the effort of not lunging at him. The words stung, but he knew Negan had a point. For now, they needed to work together. They had to find a way to put the past behind them and survive. They moved through the lot, the sound of their boots crunching on gravel. The air was still, save for the distant groan of the walkers, reminding them that their reprieve was temporary. The silence between them was thick, the unspoken tension a living presence. As they approached the far end of the lot, a row of dilapidated cars came into view. One, a beat-up old pickup, had its doors hanging open. The keys were still in the ignition, glinting in the moonlight. Negan's eyes lit up. "Well, would you look at that?" he said, striding towards the truck. "Lady Luck smiles upon us." Rick's instinct was to protest, but the sight of the vehicle was too tempting. They needed a way out of this town, and fast. He followed Negan, watching his every move. They climbed into the cab, the leather seats crackling with age. With a roar, the engine sputtered to life. The sound echoed through the deserted streets, and the walkers grew more agitated. Negan revved the engine, a sadistic glint in his eye. "Hold on tight, Ricky," he shouted over the din. "We're gonna make a grand exit." They tore out of the lot, the headlights cutting through the night. The walkers stumbled into their path, but Negan mowed them down without hesitation. The truck's suspension groaned with each impact, but the vehicle held firm. As they sped away from the town, the tension in the cabin grew. They both knew that once they were clear, the real battle would begin. The one where words and weapons would replace the unspoken agreement that had kept them alive in the basement. The horizon grew brighter with the promise of a new day, but the shadow of what awaited them outside the confines of the truck hung heavy. The bond formed in the depths of the abandoned building was about to be tested, and it remained to be seen if it would hold. For now, they were united by necessity. But once they were free from the immediate threat, the specter of the past would loom large, and the question of trust would be as deadly as the walkers they'd left behind. They drove through the night, the headlights carving a path through the darkness. The countryside was a blur of shadows and silhouettes, the occasional moan of the undead piercing the silence. The cab of the truck was tense, the air thick with the scent of sweat and fear. Rick's mind was racing, planning his next move. He knew he couldn't let Negan go unpunished for what he'd done to his friends, but he also knew that in this world, you couldn't afford to be hasty. Negan, on the other hand, seemed eerily calm. His eyes never left the road, his grip on the steering wheel firm and steady. It was as if he knew what was coming, relished the thought of the inevitable confrontation. As the sun began to rise, the truck's gas gauge dipped dangerously low. They pulled into a deserted gas station, the pumps long ago picked clean by desperate survivors. The silence was deafening as they filled up the tank from a spare can they'd found in the back. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the barren land. The quiet was shattered by the sound of gnashing teeth and shuffling feet. A small group of walkers had caught their scent. Rick's hand hovered over the machete at his side. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for. He could take Negan down, leave him to the mercy of the dead. But something held him back. Was it fear of being alone? Or was it the hope that maybe, just maybe, Negan could be reasoned with? The walkers grew closer, their hunger palpable. Negan looked over at Rick, the smirk gone from his face. "We got company," he said, his voice tight. Rick nodded, his eyes never leaving the approaching horde. "We'll deal with them," he replied, his voice a low growl. They jumped out of the truck, back to back, and faced the oncoming threat. The sun glinted off their weapons as they swung, a dance of death that was all too familiar. Negan's bat cracked skulls with the precision of a master craftsman, while Rick's machete sliced through decaying flesh with the ease of a hot knife through butter. When the last walker fell, the air was still once more. They stared at each other, breathing heavily, the weight of their situation pressing down on them like a heavy blanket. "We can't keep doing this," Rick said finally. "We can't keep running together." Negan leaned on the truck, his eyes on the horizon. "Maybe not," he conceded, "but for now, we've got a world to survive." The engine roared to life, and they drove off into the unknown, two enemies bound by a fragile alliance in the face of a never-ending horror. The road ahead was fraught with danger, but they had no choice but to follow it. The story of their survival was far from over,